Oyu cha chata dedi. Sizoçtana dramdana. Atât yalină timcegedi. Sütă tu ai mosepană. Mosepană sütă tu ai. Amaniu kerçenana. Камшом в'яче пресекуай. Муфасюри мочан земля. Сема икуна перната. Ови камбана балма бала. Măthado tăctem crapă. Să nu vienu căștăgeală. Iudiem căzov șirină. Ne papșiată. Sonia nata tavia. Sonita cafte curanana.
Ballads of the Frontier Warriors, the beginnings of Jitobashomoyo. When he was very little, Jitobashomoyo's father put him in the employ of a very rich man to work as a shepherd and a cowherd. Every day, Mujo roamed the high pastures, and day after day he would drink at the fountains and take his leisure in the shade of the trees, leaving no path untrodden. One night he was up in the valleys and the pastures with his cows and sheep. But something happened. He lost sight of them and was unable to return to the valleys of Yudbina without them. So, as nighttime fell, he was forced to take refuge in the cliffside. He began to make his bed for the night amongst the grassland, but just as he was about to lay down for a peaceful night's slumber, Jitobashomoyo heard a strange sound coming not too far away. It was the crying of two toddlers, and he saw that there were two cradles lying very near him. Mujo approached to see the crying infants, and he began to comfort them by rocking their cradles and talking gently to them until the little ones fell back into sleep. Mujo returned back to his little patch of land to fall asleep for the night, but suddenly two bright lights stood in front of him. "What are you doing?" they asked of Mujo. "Whatever compelled you to take this direction?" Mujo said, "I am a cowherd and a shepherd who lives here making his living upon these high mountain pastures, but something has happened to me on this night. I have lost sight of my cattle and I cannot return home without them. So I lay down to sleep, but soon enough I heard the whining and crying of two infants, so I approached their cradles and I consoled them until they fell back into sleep. But who are you, beings in all of your splendor?" The mystical creatures replied by saying, "We are the Zanas, Mujo, the mountain fairies on our journey to help mankind assistance and to give them what they ask of us. But what favor do you ask for consoling our infants back into sleep?" Tell us your wish and we will grant it." Mujo thought, and he responded by saying, "Well, the other shepherds often treat me with ire and derision, and they often make sport of me, and they tease me, and I would like enough strength to be able to outdo them, take my revenge." The Zanas took counsel at this amongst themselves and said, "Milk from our breasts we will give unto Mujo, so that we may give him strength." And so they did. 3 drops of milk were sufficient to give him enough strength, so that he may be able to force mighty cliffs to tremble. Upon finishing the task, the Zanas commanded Mujo by saying, "Look at that giant, huge boulder in the distance. I want you to take hold of the boulder and lift it up." So he did. The lad took hold of the boulder and seized it, and with his hands he lifted it a little. Only up to his ankles he was able to do so. The Zanas thought again and responded by saying, "We will give more of our milk unto Mujo." And so he did. He drank 3 more drops. He tackled the boulder again, and this time he managed to raise it up to his knees and then let it plummet on the ground. Once more the Zanas offered their breast milk unto Mujo, and so he did drink of it, and such was the strength accorded to him that he grappled the boulder, the mighty boulder once again, and he was able to raise it up to his waist. The Zanas took counsel amongst themselves, and said, "Once more we must give of our breast milk unto Mujo." And so they did, and such was the strength accorded to him that he acquired the strength of a mighty mountain creature. He seized the boulder once more, and this time he was able to raise it up to his shoulders and hold it suspended. The Zanas took counsel and said, "No more of our breast milk we will give unto Mujo, for he must surely gain such strength from it that he would be able to crumble and let the whole earth tremble." After the deed was done, the new friends sat together. The Zanas began to converse with Mujo, while the moon observed them from afar, and their shadows lengthened along the rock cliffs. The Zanas addressed Mujo by saying, "We wish you to be our blood brother. We wish to become friends with you for life. So what do you say?" Mujo agreed wholeheartedly, thankful for their assistance, and they said, "Whatever I may need, Zanas, come to my aid." Soon night fell, and Mujo fell asleep. And upon the return of daytime, Mujo awakened and very confused as to what had happened the night before. He wasn't quite sure, but he noticed the change had come over him. He found the cattle very easily, and so he drove them homewards. When he returned to the plain of Utbina, he noticed that, as usual, the other shepherds had gathered together in their group setting. They prepared as usual to make sport of Mujo upon seeing him return to the plain, but this time it was Mujo who took the first step. He saw the mightiest shepherd of them all, and he tackled him, hurling him into the air just as he had done with the boulder, while the other shepherds watched, mouths agape, surprised by this new change that had taken over Mujo, and not one of them was able to offer a protest, because they knew that if he touched them, they would surely have perished. Soon after that, Mujo abandoned the charge of his master, and leaving, he returned home to his mother's house, and there he began to work and fight, grew stronger, and from then on he would take part in many battles. And so began the saga of the mighty warriors of the frontier. Once upon a time there lived at Dukagjini a girl of such extraordinary beauty and charm that the godlike beauty she possessed could not be found throughout the land. Her features Her face, her body left everybody who met her spellbound, and her head and hands and feet were those of a goddess. She seemed so light that at any moment she might take flight, just like the mountain Zanas, the mountain fairies. But nature is very strange, because this great beauty possessed something quite awkward and ugly. Her movements were so crude and clumsy and uncouth that it completely rivaled her physical features. In her sleep she looked godlike, small, beautiful. But on waking up, the awkwardness of her movements and the coarseness of her speech were so painful to see. It was a great contrast. It brought her mother shame. It made her uneasy and apprehensive. Her mother was Princess Zoga, who was related to the warrior Dukagjini. The little girl's name was Lula. It so happened that the king of the land had triumphed in battle, and he had invited all the leading families of Albania, as well as many foreign families, to come to Kruja in his castle to celebrate this feat of arms. And of course, Dukagjini was amongst those invited to attend. So he put together a party to come along with him. Many warriors and chiefs, noblemen, girls, young princesses. And of course Zoga and her daughter, the beautiful but awkward Lula, were chosen to come along. Princess Zoga, Lula's mother, sighed apprehensively as she put together her beautiful gowns that she kept in a huge chest. As she imagined what everybody would say upon viewing her beautiful daughter and then approaching her and noticing the uncouth movements and the grimace on the girl's face. Finally, the day of departure arrived. The horses stamped their hooves on the cobblestones, and everybody was gathered together outside the Dukagjini castle. Bells ringing, chiefs, spears, warriors, horses, and steel breastplates shone in the April sunshine. Princess Lula, godlike beauty with the awkward face and movements, mounted her horse and rode next to her mother, silent as usual, not having anything interesting to say. Zoga was talking to the other women, the other noble women and princesses, gossiping along as they went on the mountain paths, and every once in a while she would turn to her daughter, looking behind her to say, "Be careful here, the road is not too good," for she knew that Lula was no horsewoman at all. For everything she touched turned into awkwardness. But upon turning around for the 10th time in order to warn her daughter of the paths ahead, something strange happened. She saw not her daughter, but a charming, vivacious creature, whose face seemed to radiate a strange mysticism that she had never seen before. Zoga looked more closely. Lula was the same as always. She was just as beautiful as always, and the face was hers. But there was something strange about the way she rode her horse. She seemed so skilled all of a sudden. Lula put the horse to the gallop and rode ahead with all the other youths of the party. Everybody tried their best to rival her, but she left everybody behind, clearing ditches and streams. She was so changed. She never was still, as she had often been before. She dashed up the slopes in the head of the group, making merriment, urging everybody to burst into laughter with her movements, keeping everyone awake and happy. Zoga, her mother, looked hard, and she still couldn't really believe it, because the face was her daughter's, and the figure and the body and the usual beautiful things, but when she looked closer into her eyes, there was a strange, mysterious sparkle that didn't quite seem to belong to her daughter. Well, the journey had been long, but finally Prince Dukagjini and his party arrived at Kruja, where all the big families of Albania were gathered, along with ambassadors and envoys of kings and places from all around the world. There was generally an atmosphere of mirth and merriment. Joy was written in all the faces. The sky smiled down upon this brief reprieve of triumph, for many more dark times were to follow, as had been left behind. The glorious festival in the Kruya castle began and lasted for 7 days and 7 nights. There was, of course, table spread for the guests, for natives and strangers. Musicians kept the song going night and day. There was dancing everywhere, in the glittering halls of the castle, in the houses of the nobles, in the houses of the poor, in the highways and byways and high roads. Joy resounded everywhere. Finally, towards the end of the festival and the feastings, the climax came when heralds rode out into the plains and highways and blew their trumpets, proclaiming a message from the king, saying, "The king announces that he will give the most valuable trophy found in the tent of the fallen enemy commander to the girl who comes before the court and performs the most beautiful dance." So many women came to take up the challenge. First, a girl in Turkish dress, covered from head to foot in embroidered silk. She greeted everybody in turn, came and stood before the king and queen, who granted her benevolent smiles. The courtiers stood all around. The dancer came in and prostrated herself before all the attendees. She uncovered herself and cast aside the wrap and golden slippers. She gave the musicians the tune she wanted, and so she began, looking at each spectator in turn as if trying to acquaint them with her. She stood and she swayed her arms and legs in rhythm, now in quick procession and now in slow tune. Her dance had the air of a despairing love affair. She darted at each corner of the rug, and she bent her body and she rippled her arms incessantly. She went back and forth, describing curious curves. She moved the tips of her fingers. She had rapid steps, whirling arms, a vortex of movement everywhere she went. She was never still. She stood in the middle of the carpet and kissed and caressed a breeze that she seemed to summon from the mountain air. She fell, she rose again, she moved in circle, took a few steps, and fell again, to rest. The music stopped. She received flattering glances all around, of course, and many other women came after her, Bulgarian women, slim and bright-eyed, who also whirled gaily and madly over the carpet, and others followed her too. It had been such joy to see the dance festival, and the king, taking counsel with his ambassadors and other envoys, agreed that the prize should go to the unknown woman in the Turkish wrap who performed first. He was on the point of proclaiming his decision when suddenly he was cut short by a young, beautiful girl who stepped forward onto the carpet. Everybody was amazed to see that it was indeed Princess Lula. You'd guessed it. Like Dukagjini's niece who'd come forward. She got ready for her dance. Again, she looked like a mountain goddess, but this time her eyes sparkled like never before. And her movements, not at all uncouth, not at all clumsy or awkward. Everybody was held in her grip as she raised her hands and shook her feet. Even her body seemed to be fashioned out of spring flowers and sunshine. She traced imaginary gardens around her, and flowers seemed to fall at her feet, on her body, upon her light tread. Flowers snowed upon her hair as she moved and coiled and twirled and danced. She seemed to be toying with her reflection in limpid water, and other times she seemed to be calling for an unknown lover. Other times still she seemed to recall the echo of a distant melody, and she was filled with sudden longing, making everybody in the hall feel the same way. She was so ethereal, so pliant and beautiful. Nothing like it was ever seen before. Her dance was free and light, wild, unforgettable. The general applause that followed her performance ensured that she was the winner of the dance contest, the queen of the dancers. The king and queen came down in person to take her hand, and so much flattery was shining down upon her. They called her lovely names, a goddess, a fairy, a Zanat, a moonlight, breeze, flowers. Her mother, of course, was the one who was the most speechless, recalling all the change that had come upon her daughter during this long journey. The king's courtiers took her away to make her choice amongst the trophies. She chose a golden wrap. The queen called her to her side and kissed her and hugged her, and flowers were showered down upon her. Well, finally the feasting came to an end, and everybody had had quite enough. The day of the departure came for all the visiting families and the courtiers and the ambassadors and envoys. Like them, Lake Dukagjini set off with his party for the Alps. On their way, everybody was very tired after the long journey and the 7 nights of partying, essentially. Incredibly, Lula was still inexhaustible. Again, she never rested for a minute. Again, she darted on her dove-grey horse, playing games and capers, her laughter shining, making everybody feel less dissipated. Finally, they arrived at the castle of the Dukaginis. Everybody went into their houses and supped, and they rolled onto the palaces and fell asleep. Very early the next day, there was a sound at the castle door of Princess Zoga, who was woken at a very early hour. The messenger had arrived to say that a young prince had arrived at the castle. He came from a very famous house, a very well-to-do home, and he was there and then to ask for Lula's hand in marriage. Like everybody else, he had seen her superb dancing, her vivacious smiles, her beautiful movement, her excellent figure. So, as fast as he could, he had hastened to the castle to be the very first to ask for Lula's hand in marriage before somebody else beat him to it. Zoga was very taken aback. She didn't quite realize what was happening, so as soon as she realized, she ran up to her daughter's bedroom to wake her. And there she was, Princess Lula, asleep as usual, snoring, dead to the world. Her mother tried her best to shake the girl into awakening, and finally Lula sat up bleary-eyed, with the usual grimace of disgust on her lips. Nothing of the shiny brightness, mystical laughter in her eyes, nothing vivacious about her movements at all. Zoga cried up to her daughter, "Come, come, get up! Somebody's come to marry you," she said, incredibly. But Lula wasn't perturbed at all. She just carried on in her usual sluggishness. "Hurry up! Where's your dancing?" her mother admonished her. "What? What do you mean?" said the girl. "Well, in Kruya, of course, when we were in Kruya. Where's your dancing now, like you danced before?" The girl gave out a snort. "Kruya? I've never been to Kruya in my entire life." Her mother was puzzled. This whole experience had been very puzzling indeed. Lula's eyes had retained that same dull expression as before. Her lips, no longer smiling or laughing, were now again in that twisted, senseless grimace as she always had, kind of disgust about her appearances. Everybody else noticed it too, in all the castle walls. Nobody could understand how this could be the same girl who had won the dance contest in Kruya, but their amazement came to a climax when the little girl swore that she had never remembered having danced in her life or been to Kruya in her life. The young prince who had asked for her hand in marriage met her and said a few words and inevitably left disappointed, despairing. Well, of course you might wonder what exactly had happened. What had happened to Lula? What had happened in Dukagjini? What had happened in Kruya? Well, as usual, the Zanas, the mountain fairies, were up to their old tricks again. They wanted to bring some fame to the mountains, so they arranged for one of themselves, a mountain fairy, to take the shape of Lula while she was asleep. So Lula became a changeling. They put Lula into a deep sleep and kept her in their fairy palace while all the festivities were going on. Then they sent Lula back home to the mother in the same night as her impersonator returned from the Kruya celebrations. So be wary if you ever notice anything strange, because the Zanas might just be up to their old tricks again.
puta moinha naine Epodomamara malishu Nanaine sepse Eslatnos puta moinha naine Epodomamara malishu Nanaine spirydi. Ach mój Marie, ciszę durore amam. Diciu, diciu, haide tio spiriti. Schoine bieten, de schoine bieten, Snarlan heute, snarlan uderit, meie trupai. She